Hey guys, tonight we embark on an incredible journey through forgotten maps and vanished empires. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these deep, relaxing historical journeys. Also, let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, settle in, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. There is a quiet solemnity to the passage of time. Empires rise under the brilliant glare of the sun, their monuments carved from granite and marble, claiming an eternity that history rarely grants. We remember Rome. We remember the vast expanses of the British Empire, the disciplined legions of the Byzantines, and the imposing shadow of the Mongol hordes. Their names are etched deeply into the textbooks of our youth, their ruins preserved in modern museums, their legacies celebrated in marble halls. Yet, between the grand chapters of our world's story lie the blank spaces, the forgotten realms that flourished, bled, and ultimately dissolved into the mists of antiquity. Tonight, we step away from the famous capitals and grand battlefields that dominate our history books. We turn our gaze toward the shadowy valleys, the dense, ancient forests, and the mist-shrouded mountain passes of Central and Eastern Europe. Long before the modern borders of Europe were drawn on paper, long before the rise of the great Russian Tsars or the Austrian Habsburgs, there existed a tapestry of duchies, principalities, and fractured kingdoms that once dictated the fate of millions. These were the forgotten realms of Carpathia. Imagine standing upon a windswept hill in the 10th century. Below you stretches a vast, unbroken sea of green, the ancient Carpathian Arc. Deep within these valleys, small fortresses constructed of timber and river stone clung to riverbanks. Banners flew under forgotten heraldry. Wolves, red eagles, and golden suns that no living person recognizes today. Here, rulers whose names have been erased by time governed with authority, waged bitter wars against invading nomads, and forged culture out of harsh wilderness. Why do some empires survive in our collective memory while others vanish like smoke into the midnight air? Is it merely the survival of written records, or is there a deeper, more tragic fate assigned to those who fell on the wrong side of history's shifting borders? As the fireplace crackles softly and the noise of the modern world fades away, let us journey back into a time when the mountains of Carpathia held the secrets of lost kings, forgotten dukes, and civilizations whose stories are waiting to be retold. To understand the forgotten duchies of Eastern Europe, one must first understand the landscape that birthed them. The Carpathian Mountains form a massive, sweeping arc through the heart of Europe. Stretching across modern-day Poland, Slovakia, Ukraine, Romania, Serbia, and Hungary, this formidable natural fortress has served both as a sanctuary and a battleground for millennia. In the early Middle Ages, following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the turbulent migrations of various tribes, Europe was in a state of constant flux. While Western Europe began to coalesce under the Frankish Empire of Charlemagne, the vast lands east of the Danube remained a wild, untamed frontier. It was a realm of dense primeval forests where wolves and bears roamed freely, where rivers ran wild without bridges, and where winter held the land in an iron grip for half the year. Yet, this wild land was far from empty. Slavic tribes, nomadic horsemen from the Eurasian steppes, surviving Dacian descendants, and migrating Germanic clans settled within the protective embrace of the mountains. Out of this melting pot of cultures, small, independent political entities began to emerge. The early duchies of Wallachia, Moldavia, Transylvania, and Great Moravia. Consider Great Moravia, an empire that burned brightly in the 9th century before vanishing almost entirely from common historical discourse. At its height, Great Moravia encompassed parts of the modern Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Germany. It was a sophisticated realm, complete with fortified stone strongholds, intricate trade networks, and a unique blend of Eastern and Western Christian influences. It was to this very realm that the famous brothers, Saints Cyril and Methodius, traveled to create the Glagolitic alphabet, the precursor to Cyrillic, allowing the Slavs to write their own history for the very first time. Great Moravia was a burgeoning empire that possessed all the ingredients to become a permanent superpower in Europe. Yet, within a few short decades of its greatest expansion, Great Moravia collapsed. A combination of internal succession disputes and the sudden, devastating arrival of the Magyar horsemen from the east tore the state apart. By the early 10th century, Great Moravia was gone. Its stone fortresses crumbled into overgrown mounds, its royal lineage was severed, and its vast territories were absorbed by emerging neighbours. Today, tourists walk through the ancient cobblestone streets of Central Europe, rarely realizing that beneath their feet lie the foundations of a forgotten empire that once held the balance of power between the Frankish kingdom and the Byzantine Empire. What was daily life like within these forgotten Carpathian duchies? To live in a 10th or 11th century frontier realm was to live in a state of perpetual vigilance. Unlike the sprawling, urbanized cities of the Islamic world or the Byzantine Empire at the time, life in the Carpathian duchies revolved around the fortified settlement, surrounded by heavy wooden palisades, earthen ramparts, and deep moats. These strongholds were strategically placed along trade routes and river junctions, serving as the administrative, military, and economic heart of each local lord's domain. Inside these strongholds, life was a delicate balance between survival and warfare. The local duke was not merely a monarch who sat on a distant throne. He was a warrior chief who rode into battle alongside his men. His authority relied heavily on his ability to protect his people from external raids and ensure the flow of trade along the mountain passes. The populace consisted primarily of free farmers, blacksmiths, weavers, and traders. They cultivated hardy crops like rye, barley, and oats in clearings carved out of the dense forests. Animal husbandry, raising cattle, sheep, and pigs, was vital, as was apiculture. Honey and beeswax were priceless commodities in medieval Europe, used both for sweetness and for lighting the dark stone halls of nobles and churches. Trade routes traversed these mountains, carrying precious goods from the Orient to northern Europe. Amber from the Baltic Sea moved south, while silk, spices, and silver coins from Constantinople travelled north. The Carpathian dukes levied tolls on merchant caravans passing through their mountain gateways, filling their treasuries with foreign coin and luxury goods. Yet, security was an illusion. At any moment, the horizon could fill with the smoke of burning villages. The Eurasian steppe, stretching thousands of miles to the east, was a highway for nomadic warrior cultures. The Pechenegs, the Cumans, and later, the formidable Mongols. When an invasion threatened, the horn would sound across the valley. Farmers abandoned their wooden plows, grabbed iron-tipped spears and crude shields, and retreated behind the wooden walls of the fortresses. For weeks, these small bastions would endure sieges, held together by sheer desperation and the tactical brilliance of their local rulers. It was a harsh, grueling existence, yet it fostered a unique spirit of resilience. The culture of the Carpathian realms was deeply intertwined with nature, folklore, and a profound reverence for the mountains that sheltered them. Long after formal Christianity was adopted by the ruling elites, the common people maintained ancient pagan customs, whispering prayers to forest spirits, burning fires to ward off winter demons, and honoring the sacred springs of the mountains. Further south, along the lower slopes of the Carpathians, two other principalities emerged that would play a crucial, yet often overlooked, role in European history: Wallachia and Moldavia. For centuries, these lands served as the eastern wall of Christian Europe, enduring wave after wave of invasions. To the west lay the powerful kingdom of Hungary and the Holy Roman Empire. To the south, across the Danube River, loomed the expanding power of the Ottoman Empire. Caught in the middle of these titanic forces, the rulers of Wallachia and Moldavia had to master the arts of diplomacy, guerrilla warfare, and survival. Consider the story of Mircea the Elder, who ruled Wallachia in the late 14th century. While history books often gloss over his reign, Mircea was one of the most formidable strategists of his era. Facing the mighty Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Rovine in 1395, Mircea realized his smaller, less equipped army could not defeat the Ottomans in open field combat. Using the terrain to his advantage, Mircea drew the Ottoman army deep into the dense, swampy woodlands of Wallachia. Through a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare, using archers hidden in the tree canopy, night raids, and blocking narrow forest paths, Mircea inflicted devastating losses on the Ottoman army, forcing one of the world's greatest conquerors to retreat back across the Danube. Similarly, in Moldavia, Prince Stephen the Great held his small realm against impossible odds for nearly 50 years. He fought over 40 battles against Ottomans, Tatars, and Hungarians, winning nearly all of them despite being routinely outnumbered. Yet, outside of Romania and Moldova, the legacy of Stephen the Great is rarely taught in Western history classes. Why have these realms been forgotten by the wider world? Part of the answer lies in the tragic fate of their autonomy. As the centuries wore on, Wallachia and Moldavia were forced to become vassal states to the Ottoman Empire, paying heavy tributes in gold and resources to maintain their internal self-rule. Because they were eventually absorbed into larger modern nation-states in the 19th century, their distinct historical identities were subsumed. Their early triumphs archived in obscure monastic chronicles written in Old Church Slavonic. If you travel through the rural valleys of the Carpathians today, you can still catch glimpses of these lost realms. They do not exist in towering marble palaces like Versailles or massive amphitheatres like the Colosseum, but in far more humble, haunting structures. Consider the wooden churches of Maramuurs in southern Poland. Built by local craftsmen without using a single iron nail, these towering wooden structures feature steep roofs, delicate shingles, and slender bell towers that pierce the mist like wooden needles. They were designed to blend seamlessly into the forest, serving both as places of worship and as places of refuge during raids. Inside these churches, centuries-old frescoes painted on linen and pasted onto wooden planks display a fascinating blend of Byzantine theology and local folklore. The faces of the saints painted on these walls do not resemble distant Mediterranean icons. They bear the rugged features of the Carpathian highlanders who painted them, men and women who lived in the shadow of relentless conquest. Then there are the ruined fortresses perched high on cliffs above river valleys. Many of these strongholds now stand in silence, overtaken by moss, ivy, and tree roots. The stone steps where dukes once walked are now worn smooth by centuries of rain. Standing amidst these ruins at dusk, as the mountain mist rolls over the stone battlements, one can almost hear the faint echoes of the past. The clatter of iron armor, the low murmur of ancient languages, and the haunting melodies of traditional mountain flutes echoing through the trees. The story of the lost Carpathian duchies brings us to a profound philosophical question. What causes an empire or a civilization to be forgotten? In the study of history, we often assume that only the weak or insignificant cultures disappear. We tend to believe in a form of historical survival, that the most advanced, powerful, and culturally rich societies naturally survive in our memory, while lesser states fade away. However, the history of Central and Eastern Europe proves that this assumption is flawed. The disappearance of a realm from popular memory is rarely a reflection of its importance during its own time. Instead, it is governed by three primary forces: geopolitical absorption, textual loss, and cultural redefinition. When a smaller state is conquered or peacefully united with a larger neighbor, the dominant power inevitably rewrites the narrative. The achievements of the smaller realm are rebranded as minor regional developments or integrated into the history of the conqueror. The rich, distinct story of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, for example, was heavily obscured after its union with Poland and subsequent incorporation into the Russian Empire. History is written by those who preserve records. In regions subjected to frequent invasions, sacking of monasteries, and burning of archives, centuries of written history can be wiped out in a single night of devastation. When the Mongols swept through Eastern Europe in the 1240s, dozens of royal libraries, monastic chronicles, and legal codes were reduced to ashes, leaving modern historians with only fragments of the truth. As modern nation-states emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries, nationalist historians actively chose which medieval realms to celebrate and which to ignore. Realms that did not neatly fit into the modern narrative of a specific country were often left out of school curricula and popular media. Thus, the lost duchies of Carpathia were not weak, nor were they uninteresting. They were simply caught in the turbulent crossroads of geography and time, a buffer zone between great empires that swallowed their stories whole. As the night deepens and our journey through the shadowy valleys of Carpathia comes to a close, we are left with a quiet realization. History is not merely a straight line of triumphs led by famous emperors. It is an ocean filled with countless forgotten currents, small realms, and unsung heroes who fought fiercely for their land, their culture, and their people. The forgotten duchies of Eastern Europe may no longer exist on modern maps. Their borders have been erased, their banners have rotted away, and their kings have long since returned to the earth. Yet, their legacy lives on in subtle, quiet ways. It lives in the unique music and folklore of the mountain villages, in the resilient spirit of the people who call the Carpathians home today, and in the quiet wooden churches that still stand watch over the valleys. They remind us that all empires, no matter how grand, no matter how powerful, are ultimately temporary. The mountains remain, the forests endure, and the wind continues to whisper through the ruins of lost kingdoms. As you drift off into a peaceful sleep tonight, let your mind wander through those ancient mist-filled passes. Imagine the glow of a campfire outside a timber fortress, the silent watchman looking out over the dark valley, and the quiet dignity of a lost world resting peacefully beneath the stars. Leaving behind the shadowy, mist-covered peaks of Carpathia, our journey through the forgotten maps of the past turns westward toward the rolling heartlands of Western Europe. Today, if you travel through the borderlands of modern France, Switzerland, and Germany, you see picturesque vineyards, ancient stone cathedrals, and quiet valleys where time seems to move slowly. Yet, beneath these peaceful landscapes lies the dust of a forgotten sovereign power, a realm that once rivaled the greatest monarchies of the medieval world, only to vanish into the mists of history. This was the Kingdom of Burgundy. To the modern ear, Burgundy might evoke images of fine red wine or a tranquil region in east-central France. But centuries ago, Burgundy was far more than a region. It was a crown, an identity, and an empire in its own right. At its height, the dukes and kings of Burgundy ruled over a domain that stretched from the freezing waters of the North Sea down to the shores of the Mediterranean. They possessed some of the wealthiest cities in Europe: Ghent, Bruges, Brussels, and Dijon. Their courts were celebrated as the very pinnacle of chivalry, art, and grand diplomacy. Yet today, if you look at a map of Europe, there is no nation called Burgundy. It has no seat in the United Nations, no sovereign flag flying over a modern capital, and no national anthem taught in schools. It was swallowed whole by its powerful neighbours, absorbed into France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Low Countries, until its story became a mere footnote in the wider history of Europe. To understand how a kingdom as magnificent as Burgundy could simply vanish, we must travel back to the turbulent era following the fall of Rome. The original Burgundians were a Germanic tribe who crossed the Rhine during the Great Migration period of the 5th century. They were warriors who sought a homeland in the fertile valleys of the Rhone and the Saône rivers. Their early encounters with the decaying Roman Empire were defined by both brutal warfare and tentative alliances. In those early centuries, Burgundy was a shifting, fluid entity. It split, reunited, and divided again as local warlords and Frankish kings carved up the lands of Western Europe. At various points, history knew a kingdom of Upper Burgundy, a kingdom of Lower Burgundy, and the vast kingdom of Arles. It was a realm in search of a permanent identity, trapped geometrically between the rising power of the French crown to the west and the massive, fractured expanse of the Holy Roman Empire to the east. It was during the late Middle Ages, under a dynamic dynasty known as the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, that this realm reached its golden age. Starting in the 14th century, 4 remarkable rulers set out to forge a third great superpower in Western Europe, a grand middle kingdom that would stand equal between France and Germany. These 4 dukes were known to history by vivid names that matched their ambition: Philip the Bold, John the Fearless, Philip the Good, and Charles the Bold. Through strategic marriages, clever diplomacy, and aggressive military campaigns, these dukes acquired territory after territory. They brought together 2 distinct geographical clusters: the rich agricultural heartland of the original Duchy of Burgundy in the south, and the booming industrial cities of Flanders and the Netherlands in the north. The result was an economic juggernaut. The Burgundian Netherlands produced the finest cloth, tapestries, and illuminated manuscripts in the Western world. Wealth flowed through the markets of Bruges and Ghent in amounts that made the kings of France and the Holy Roman Emperors envious. The Dukes of Burgundy used this staggering wealth to create a court of unprecedented luxury. Imagine stepping into the palace at Dijon in the 15th century. The halls were draped in gold-threaded tapestries depicting ancient legends. Musicians performed complex polyphonic music that echoed off vaulted stone ceilings. Knights clad in polished, highly detailed plate armor competed in grand tournaments held under silk banners. It was at the Burgundian court that the legendary Order of the Golden Fleece was founded, an exclusive brotherhood of knights that became the ultimate symbol of European nobility. In many ways, the Burgundian court defined what we think of today as classic medieval courtly life. They were patrons to master painters like Jan van Eyck, whose brilliant oil paintings captured the light, wealth, and deep piety of the era. The Burgundian dukes were not merely ruling a territory, they were constructing a grand cultural brand that projected supreme power and sophistication. Yet, despite all this wealth and cultural brilliance, Burgundy suffered from a fatal weakness. Geographically, it was a divided nation. The northern territories in Flanders and the southern duchy in France were separated by independent lands belonging to the Holy Roman Empire and France. To truly become a unified, permanent kingdom, Burgundy needed to bridge this physical gap and secure a royal crown from the Holy Roman Emperor. This grand ambition rested on the shoulders of the 4th and final Valois Duke, Charles the Bold. Charles was a man of intense energy, boundless ambition, and unforgiving rigidity. He envisioned a revived Middle Kingdom, stretching unbroken from the North Sea down to Italy, effectively cutting off France from the rest of the continent. Charles spent his entire reign on horseback, fighting battles, laying sieges, and conducting high-stakes diplomacy. He poured the vast fortunes of the Burgundian state into a permanent standing army equipped with the latest gunpowder artillery. For a time, it seemed as though nothing could stop the momentum of the Burgundian rise. However, ambition without restraint often invites disaster. In his relentless pursuit to unite his fractured lands, Charles turned his gaze toward the rugged, independent confederation of the Swiss cantons and the Duchy of Lorraine. He underestimated the fierceness of the Swiss mountain warriors, who fought not for chivalric honor, but for the sheer survival of their freedom. In a series of brutal battles, the disciplined, highly professional Burgundian army was shattered by the Swiss pike squares. The climax came in the freezing winter of 1477 at the Battle of Nancy. Caught in a blizzard, heavily outnumbered, and betrayed by mercenaries, Charles the Bold fought valiantly, but his army was completely crushed. Days after the battle, the body of the last great Duke of Burgundy was found frozen in a marshy pond outside the city walls, half eaten by wolves and stripped of his fine armor. He was identified only by his personal physician through old battle scars. With the sudden death of Charles the Bold, the dream of an independent Burgundian kingdom collapsed in a matter of days. Charles left behind no male heir, only a single daughter, Mary of Burgundy. Seeing an opportunity to crush their rival forever, the French crown immediately invaded and reclaimed the Duchy of Burgundy. Meanwhile, Mary of Burgundy hastily married Maximilian of Habsburg, the future Holy Roman Emperor, to protect her remaining northern territories in the Netherlands. In an instant, the vast Burgundian realm was carved up by the superpowers of Europe. The southern heartland became a province of France, while the northern rich cities were absorbed into the massive empire of the Habsburgs. The Middle Kingdom that had flickered so brightly was extinguished, its lands partitioned, its identity slowly eroded over centuries of political realignment. Why does the story of Burgundy matter to us today? It serves as a powerful reminder that the map of the world is not set in stone. We often look at modern borders as if they were natural and inevitable, assuming that France, Germany, and Switzerland were always meant to exist in their current forms. But Burgundy proves that history could have easily taken a completely different path. Had Charles the Bold succeeded, European history would have been fundamentally rewritten. A vast, wealthy, French-speaking middle state would have stood between France and Germany, likely preventing centuries of direct Franco-German conflicts that culminated in the devastating world wars of the 20th century. The culture, politics, and power dynamics of modern Europe would look radically different. Today, as you wander through the historic streets of Dijon, Ghent, or Bruges, you can still feel the silent presence of this ghost kingdom. You see it in the magnificent Gothic architecture, in the breathtaking paintings hanging in quiet museums, and in the proud, independent spirit of the local culture. Burgundy may have lost its place on the political map, but its soul remains woven into the very fabric of Western Europe. It stands as a testament to an age when bold dreams, immense wealth, and tragic ambition created a realm that shone with brilliant radiance before falling into the quiet darkness of memory. As the night continues and the silence settles around you, let your thoughts drift through those ancient stone halls. Imagine the faint sound of medieval lutes playing in a distant palace, the soft flickering of candlelight against golden tapestries, and the peaceful rest of a kingdom that once dared to challenge the world. Turning our gaze south from the misty valleys of Europe, across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, we enter a realm where the desert sun bakes golden sands that stretch to the horizon. Deep along the winding banks of the Upper Nile River, in a land known in antiquity as Nubia, there once flourished an empire that stood as a formidable peer, rival, and ruler of ancient Egypt. Yet, while Egypt's pyramids and pharaohs dominate our imagination, this towering empire of black pharaohs, iron workers, and gold merchants remains one of history's most overlooked civilizations. This was the lost kingdom of Kush. To understand the mystery of Kush, we must strip away the modern biases that have long obscured African history. For centuries, Western scholars viewed Nubia merely as a shadowy southern province of Egypt, a source of ivory, ebony, incense, and gold. But beneath the sands of modern-day Sudan lies proof of a distinct, sophisticated, and mighty empire that built more pyramids than Egypt itself, commanded vast armies, and forged a culture that endured for over 2,000 years. Our journey into Kush begins around 2,000 years before the Common Era. As the Nile flowed northward through narrow granite canyons and vast desert plains, the people of Kush built their first great capital at Kerma. This was not a primitive frontier settlement. Kerma was a sprawling metropolis featuring massive mud brick monuments known as defufas, soaring multi-story structures that served as religious centers and royal residences. Surrounding these monuments were bustling markets, complex bronze foundries, and vast royal tombs where kings were laid to rest with astonishing treasures of gold, pottery, and jewelry. Kerma grew so wealthy and powerful that it posed a direct threat to the Egyptian pharaohs of the New Kingdom. For centuries, Egypt and Kush engaged in a brutal tug-of-war. Egypt invaded and occupied Nubia, building massive fortresses and imposing its religion and language upon the people. Yet, Kush was not crushed. It adapted. The Kushites absorbed Egyptian traditions, arts, and architecture, blending them seamlessly with their own indigenous African customs, spiritual beliefs, and language. When the New Kingdom of Egypt began to fracture and decay into internal chaos around the 8th century before the Common Era, Kush did not merely reclaim its independence. It rose from the southern sands to claim the ultimate prize. Led by their visionary King Pa, the armies of Kush marched north along the Nile. Riding in war chariots and wielding deadly longbows, the Kushite warriors swept through Upper and Lower Egypt. City after city yielded to the Nubian monarch. Pa did not conquer out of a desire for destruction. He saw himself as a champion of traditional values, sent by the gods to restore order and holiness to a fractured land. Upon completing his conquest, Pa established the 25th dynasty of Egypt, an era ruled entirely by black pharaohs from Nubia. For nearly a century, the kings of Kush wore the double crown of Egypt and Nubia, their royal emblems adorned with two rearing cobras representing the union of the two vast realms. Among these royal figures stood Pharaoh Taharqa, a monarch whose reign marked a golden age of architecture, economic prosperity, and military grandeur. Taharqa poured immense wealth into restoring ancient temples from Thebes to Memphis. He constructed towering monuments and revived the ancient art of pyramid building, which had been abandoned in Egypt for centuries. His power was recognized far beyond the borders of Africa. His name is even recorded in the ancient scriptures of the Near East as a formidable military force who allied with neighboring realms against the expanding Neo-Assyrian Empire. Yet, this golden age of the 25th dynasty was destined to end in conflict. The clash between the bronze-armored legions of Kush and the iron-weaponed armies of the Assyrians resulted in a series of brutal wars. Forced to withdraw south of the Nile's cataracts, the kings of Kush retreated into their Nubian heartland. But this was far from the end of their empire. It was simply the beginning of a magnificent new era. Relocating their capital further south to the city of Meroe, the kingdom of Kush transformed into an industrial and commercial superpower. Meroe was strategically situated in a fertile region rich in iron ore and hardwood forests. The Kushites mastered the technology of iron smelting, turning Meroe into the supreme iron manufacturing hub of North Africa. Vast mounds of slag, the byproduct of iron production, can still be seen surrounding the ruins of Meroe today, silent witnesses to an ancient industrial empire that forged weapons, tools, and trade goods distributed across Africa, the Mediterranean, and Asia. Meroe was also famous for its unique political structure. Unlike many ancient civilizations where women were relegated to the shadows, Kush was celebrated for its fierce, ruling queens known as the Kandaks. These royal women were not mere consorts or regents. They were absolute rulers, high priestesses, and military commanders who led armies into battle. When the mighty Roman Empire conquered Egypt under Augustus Caesar, Roman legions pushed south toward Nubia. They were met on the battlefield by Queen Amanirenas, a legendary Kandake described by historians as a courageous warrior blind in one eye. Leading her armies with ruthless tactical brilliance, Amanirenas fought the Roman legions to a standstill in a bloody war that lasted several years. Realizing the immense cost of fighting deep in the desert, Augustus Caesar agreed to a peace treaty with Kush. The terms were remarkably favorable to Nubia. Kush paid no tribute to Rome, retained its full sovereignty, and established a permanent, respected border. As a symbol of her victory, Queen Amanirenas brought back a bronze head of Augustus Caesar looted from a Roman camp, burying it beneath the threshold of a Meroitic temple so that everyone entering the temple would walk upon the head of the Roman emperor. For hundreds of years, Meroe flourished. The Kushites developed their own written script, Meroitic, an alphabet that remains one of antiquity's most tantalizing unsolved mysteries, as modern linguists can pronounce the letters but have yet to fully translate the language. They built steep, elegant pyramids surrounded by sandstone temples decorated with carvings of fierce queens, war elephants, and lion-headed deities unique to African mythology. How, then, did such a vibrant and powerful empire fade into obscurity? The downfall of Kush was not caused by a single cataclysmic conquest, but by a gradual shift in the global tides of trade and environmental decay. Over centuries, the immense consumption of timber required for iron smelting deforested the lands around Meroe, turning fertile terrain into barren desert. Simultaneously, new trade routes developed along the Red Sea, bypassing the Nile River routes that had enriched Kush for generations. A rival kingdom to the east, the Christian empire of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia, rose to dominate regional trade. Around the mid-4th century of the Common Era, Aksumite armies marched into Meroe, finding a city already weakened by economic decline and ecological degradation. The grand temples were abandoned, the iron furnaces went cold, and the royal lineage came to an end. Over the centuries that followed, shifting desert winds swept across the Nubian desert, burying the sandstone temples, royal palaces, and hundreds of steep pyramids under mountain-high dunes of golden sand. Western history turned its spotlight toward Europe and Egypt, choosing to overlook the brilliant Black Empire that had once commanded the Nile. Today, if you travel to the quiet deserts of northern Sudan, you will find a landscape of breathtaking, silent beauty. Rising sharply from the red dunes are dozens of forgotten pyramids at Meroe, standing far denser than those at Giza. There are no massive tourist crowds, no modern neon lights, only the soft whistle of the desert wind carrying the ancient dust past sandstone walls carved with forgotten gods. Standing among these silent structures at sunset, as the sky turns shades of purple and gold, one is overcome by the quiet grandeur of a realm that held superpowers at bay, ruled the Nile, and proved that greatness takes many forms across the vast tapestry of human history. As night falls over the desert and the stars ignite the African sky, imagine the warm breeze carrying the faint echoes of bronze hammers, the marching footsteps of ancient armies, and the peaceful rest of an empire sleeping beneath the golden sands. Turning our gaze south from the misty valleys of Europe, across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, we enter a realm where the desert sun bakes golden sands that stretch to the horizon. Deep along the winding banks of the Upper Nile River, in a land known in antiquity as Nubia, there once flourished an empire that stood as a formidable peer, rival, and ruler of ancient Egypt. Yet, while Egypt's pyramids and pharaohs dominate our imagination, this towering empire of black pharaohs, iron workers, and gold merchants remains one of history's most overlooked civilizations. This was the lost kingdom of Kush. To understand the mystery of Kush, we must strip away the modern biases that have long obscured African history. For centuries, Western scholars viewed Nubia merely as a shadowy southern province of Egypt, a source of ivory, ebony, incense, and gold. But beneath the sands of modern-day Sudan lies proof of a distinct, sophisticated, and mighty empire that built more pyramids than Egypt itself, commanded vast armies, and forged a culture that endured for over 2,000 years. Our journey into Kush begins around 2,000 years before the Common Era. As the Nile flowed northward through narrow granite canyons and vast desert plains, the people of Kush built their first great capital at Kerma. This was not a primitive frontier settlement. Kerma was a sprawling metropolis featuring massive mud brick monuments known as defufas, soaring multi-story structures that served as religious centers and royal residences. Surrounding these monuments were bustling markets, complex bronze foundries, and vast royal tombs where kings were laid to rest with astonishing treasures of gold, pottery, and jewelry. Kerma grew so wealthy and powerful that it posed a direct threat to the Egyptian pharaohs of the New Kingdom. For centuries, Egypt and Kush engaged in a brutal tug-of-war. Egypt invaded and occupied Nubia, building massive fortresses and imposing its religion and language upon the people. Yet, Kush was not crushed. It adapted. The Kushites absorbed Egyptian traditions, arts, and architecture, blending them seamlessly with their own indigenous African customs, spiritual beliefs, and language. When the New Kingdom of Egypt began to fracture and decay into internal chaos around the 8th century before the Common Era, Kush did not merely reclaim its independence. It rose from the southern sands to claim the ultimate prize. Led by their visionary king Piye, the armies of Kush marched north along the Nile. Riding in war chariots and wielding deadly longbows, the Kushite warriors swept through Upper and Lower Egypt. City after city yielded to the Nubian monarch. Piye did not conquer out of a desire for destruction. He saw himself as a champion of traditional values, sent by the gods to restore order and holiness to a fractured land. Upon completing his conquest, Piye established the 25th dynasty of Egypt, an era ruled entirely by black pharaohs from Nubia. For nearly a century, the kings of Kush wore the double crown of Egypt and Nubia, their royal emblems adorned with two rearing cobras representing the union of the two vast realms. Among these royal figures stood Pharaoh Taharqa, a monarch whose reign marked a golden age of architecture, economic prosperity, and military grandeur. Taharqa poured immense wealth into restoring ancient temples from Thebes to Memphis. He constructed towering monuments and revived the ancient art of pyramid building, which had been abandoned in Egypt for centuries. His power was recognized far beyond the borders of Africa. His name is even recorded in the ancient scriptures of the Near East as a formidable military force who allied with neighboring realms against the expanding Neo-Assyrian Empire. Meroe was also famous for its unique political structure. Unlike many ancient civilizations where women were relegated to the shadows, Kush was celebrated for its fierce, ruling queens known as the Kandaks. These royal women were not mere consorts or regents. They were absolute rulers, high priestesses, and military commanders who led armies into battle. When the mighty Roman Empire conquered Egypt under Augustus Caesar, Roman legions pushed south toward Nubia. They were met on the battlefield by Queen Amanirenas, a legendary Kandake described by historians as a courageous warrior blind in one eye. Leading her armies with ruthless tactical brilliance, Amanirenas fought the Roman legions to a standstill in a bloody war that lasted several years. Realizing the immense cost of fighting deep in the desert, Augustus Caesar agreed to a peace treaty with Kush. The terms were remarkably favorable to Nubia. Kush paid no tribute to Rome, retained its full sovereignty, and established a permanent, respected border. As a symbol of her victory, Queen Amanirenas brought back a bronze head of Augustus Caesar looted from a Roman camp, burying it beneath the threshold of a Meroitic temple so that everyone entering the temple would walk upon the head of the Roman emperor. For hundreds of years, Meroe flourished. The Kushites developed their own written script, Meroitic, an alphabet that remains one of antiquity's most tantalizing unsolved mysteries, as modern linguists can pronounce the letters but have yet to fully translate the language. They built steep, elegant pyramids surrounded by sandstone temples decorated with carvings of fierce queens, war elephants, and lion-headed deities unique to African mythology. How, then, did such a vibrant and powerful empire fade into obscurity? The downfall of Kush was not caused by a single cataclysmic conquest, but by a gradual shift in the global tides of trade and environmental decay. Over centuries, the immense consumption of timber required for iron smelting deforested the lands around Meroe, turning fertile terrain into barren desert. Simultaneously, new trade routes developed along the Red Sea, bypassing the Nile River routes that had enriched Kush for generations. A rival kingdom to the east, the Christian empire of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia, rose to dominate regional trade. Around the mid-4th century of the Common Era, Aksumite armies marched into Meroe, finding a city already weakened by economic decline and ecological degradation. The grand temples were abandoned, the iron furnaces went cold, and the royal lineage came to an end. Over the centuries that followed, shifting desert winds swept across the Nubian desert, burying the sandstone temples, royal palaces, and hundreds of steep pyramids under mountain-high dunes of golden sand. Western history turned its spotlight toward Europe and Egypt, choosing to overlook the brilliant Black Empire that had once commanded the Nile. Today, if you travel to the quiet deserts of northern Sudan, you will find a landscape of breathtaking, silent beauty. Rising sharply from the red dunes are dozens of forgotten pyramids at Meroe, standing far denser than those at Giza. There are no massive tourist crowds, no modern neon lights, only the soft whistle of the desert wind carrying the ancient dust past sandstone walls carved with forgotten gods. Standing among these silent structures at sunset, as the sky turns shades of purple and gold, one is overcome by the quiet grandeur of a realm that held superpowers at bay, ruled the Nile, and proved that greatness takes many forms across the vast tapestry of human history. As night falls over the desert and the stars ignite the African sky, imagine the warm breeze carrying the faint echoes of bronze hammers, the marching footsteps of ancient armies, and the peaceful rest of an empire sleeping beneath the golden sands. Leaving behind the ancient woodlands of Europe and crossing the vast, turbulent expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, our search for forgotten empires turns toward the vast floodplains of North America. Centuries before European explorers set foot on the continent, long before the rise of the Aztec Empire in Mexico or the Inca in the Andes, a massive, highly sophisticated urban civilization flourished along the banks of the Mississippi River. Yet, for generations, school textbooks told a story of North America as an untamed wilderness populated only by nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes living in small, scattered villages. Beneath the lush soil of the American Midwest lies proof of a breathtakingly complex metropolis that once boasted a population larger than medieval London or Paris. This was Cahokia, the grand city of the sun gods. To understand the wonder of Cahokia, we must travel back to the 11th century of the Common Era, near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, close to modern-day St. Louis. Here, in a fertile region known as the American Bottom, a dramatic cultural revolution took place around the year 1050. Virtually overnight in historical terms, scattered agricultural communities coalesced into a planned, grand metropolis spanning over 6 square miles. At its peak, Cahokia was home to an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 people, with some historians suggesting an even higher population when including the surrounding satellite towns. It was the largest urban center ever constructed in North America, north of Mexico, prior to the late 18th century. At the heart of this sprawling city stood monumental engineering feats that boggle the modern mind. The Mississippian people of Cahokia were master builders, but instead of carving stone palaces or marble temples, they constructed massive earthen pyramids and platform mounds, using nothing more than woven baskets, stone hoes, and human labor. The citizens of Cahokia excavated, transported, and deposited over 55 million cubic feet of earth to shape their city. Over 100 earthen mounds once dotted the cityscape. Dominating the central plaza was Monk's Mound, a colossal, four-tiered earthen pyramid that rose 10 stories high, covering an area of 14 acres at its base, larger than the footprint of the Great Pyramid of Giza. To stand at the base of Monk's Mound in the year 1100 was to behold a sight of supreme power and order. Atop this mountain of earth stood a massive wooden temple or royal residence, soaring 50 feet into the sky, painted in vivid red and black colors. From this high vantage point, the paramount leader, a god-king known as the Great Sun, looked down upon his domain. Surrounding Monk's Mound was a grand public plaza covering nearly 50 acres, expertly leveled by engineers. Here, thousands of citizens gathered for massive seasonal festivals, religious rituals, and competitive games. One of the most popular sports was Chunky, a fast-paced, high-stakes game where players threw smooth stone discs along a clay court while spearing the spot where they predicted the disc would land. Chunky was not merely entertainment. It was a deeply spiritual and political event used to settle disputes, display athletic brilliance, and bind distant allied villages to the central authority of Cahokia. Beyond the Grand Plaza stretched meticulously organized neighborhoods. Houses were built in neat rows, constructed of timber posts, woven thatch, and plaster walls made of mud and grass. Specialized workshop districts housed artisans who crafted exquisite jewelry from seashells brought from the Gulf of Mexico, copper ornaments hammered into delicate birdman shapes, and flint weapons carved from sparkling stone. Cahokia was also a center of profound astronomical and scientific knowledge. Just west of Monk's Mound, archaeologists discovered a series of massive timber circles known today as woodhing. Consisting of giant red cedar posts precisely spaced in a circle, woodhing functioned as an ancient solar calendar. Standing in the center of the circle during the summer or winter solstice, a priest could watch the sun rise directly behind Monk's Mound, signaling the exact day to plant crops, hold seasonal ceremonies, or harvest the abundant fields of maize. Maize, or corn, was the lifeblood of Cahokia. The introduction of high-yield corn agriculture from Mesoamerica provided the massive food surplus necessary to sustain thousands of urban workers, priest-kings, and craftsmen who were not engaged in full-time farming. The rich, alluvial soil of the Mississippi floodplain, replenished annually by seasonal river floods, yielded staggering harvests that were stored in giant public granaries. Yet, despite its wealth, urban sophistication, and regional influence, Cahokia was a realm of dark and complex religious rituals. Archaeological excavations at Mound 72 revealed a chilling glimpse into the spiritual world of the Mississippians. Beneath this modest ridgetop mound, researchers uncovered the burial of a high-ranking noble known as the Birdman. He was laid to rest on a bed of over 20,000 marine shell beads arranged in the shape of a giant falcon, a symbol of warfare, the sky, and political authority. Surrounding the Birdman were the remains of dozens of sacrificial victims, including young women dressed in fine garments, 4 men with their heads and hands removed, and several high-status individuals buried with priceless offerings of mica, copper, and polished arrowheads. To the people of Cahokia, these sacrifices were not viewed as mindless cruelty, but as essential cosmic transactions needed to maintain the harmony of the universe, ensure the fertility of the soil, and appease the powerful deities of the underworld and the sky. For nearly 2 centuries, Cahokia reigned supreme as the cultural, economic, and spiritual heart of the North American continent. Its influence spread for hundreds of miles along river networks, inspiring the rise of secondary mound-building cultures across the American South and Midwest. How, then, did this booming metropolis disappear so completely that by the time European explorers arrived in the 16th century, the city was entirely abandoned, its very name lost to history? The collapse of Cahokia was a complex, slow-motion catastrophe driven by environmental degradation, climate change, and political decay. As the population grew, the demand for natural resources reached an unsustainable level. Millions of trees were felled to construct houses, fuel cooking fires, and build a massive stockade, a 2-mile-long wooden fortress wall with guard towers that enclosed the central ceremonial heart of the city. Deforestation led to severe soil erosion, which degraded agricultural fields and caused catastrophic localized flooding during heavy rains. Compounding these environmental struggles was the arrival of the Little Ice Age in the 13th century. Global temperatures plummeted, leading to erratic weather patterns, severe droughts, and shortened growing seasons across North America. The delicate agricultural system that fed tens of thousands of citizens began to collapse. Food shortages inevitably bred social unrest. The stockade wall, which was rebuilt 4 times during Cahokia's later years, suggests that the city faced increasing internal conflict or attacks from rival groups competing for scarce resources. The absolute power of the Great Sun and the priesthood, which relied on their promise to control the weather and secure abundant harvests, evaporated as the crops failed. By the late 14th century, the golden age of Cahokia was over. Families began packing their belongings, abandoning their thatched homes, and dispersing into smaller, decentralized tribes across the plains and forests. Over the next few centuries, shifting winds, seasonal rains, and thick vegetation reclaimed the abandoned city. The wooden temples rotted away, the stockade wall crumbled into dust, and the grand timber circles collapsed into the soil. Only the massive earthen mounds remained, standing like giant green hills against the flat Midwestern sky. When white settlers began moving into the Mississippi Valley in the 19th century, they marveled at the giant earthen structures, often refusing to believe that indigenous Native Americans were capable of building such grand monuments. They fabricated myths of a lost race of European mound builders, erasing the true heritage of the Mississippian civilization. Today, Cahokia Mounds is recognized as a World Heritage Site, preserved in southern Illinois. Yet, driving past the site on nearby modern highways, few commuters realize that they are passing the ruins of an ancient metropolis that once rivaled the greatest capitals of the ancient world. Standing atop Monk's Mound at twilight, looking out over the vast Mississippi floodplain as the sun sets behind distant city skylines, one feels the silent majesty of a forgotten world. The wind rustles through the grass, covering the ancient slopes, whispering the memory of a time when the sun gods ruled the great river, and a soaring city of earth and timber claimed its place among the stars. Crossing the roaring waters of the Atlantic once again, and traveling deep into the sun-drenched plateau of southern Africa, our search for lost empires brings us to a realm of granite, gold, and stone. Long before European colonizers laid claim to the African continent, asserting that indigenous societies lacked complex architecture or urban organization, a monumental city of dry stone walls rose majestically between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers. Yet, for decades, 19th century European explorers refused to credit the local population for its construction, inventing fanciful myths that the city was built by the biblical Queen of Sheba, Phoenicians, or ancient Romans. Beneath these colonial fables lies the true, astonishing history of an indigenous African empire that commanded regional trade routes, forged exquisite golden artifacts, and constructed towering stone monuments without using a single drop of mortar. This was Great Zimbabwe, the unwritten realm of the Shona kings. To understand the rise of Great Zimbabwe, we must journey back to the 11th century of the Common Era. The high plateau of modern-day Zimbabwe offered an ideal environment for a burgeoning civilization. Blessed with fertile grasslands for cattle grazing, dependable rainfall, and rich deposits of iron, copper, and gold, the region attracted ancestral Shona-speaking communities, specifically the ancestors of the modern Karanga people. At its core, the wealth and social structure of Great Zimbabwe revolved around cattle. In Shona society, cattle were far more than a source of meat and milk. They were the ultimate measure of status, political power, and spiritual connection. A leader who possessed vast herds could feed thousands of followers, forge strategic political alliances through bride wealth, and maintain a standing workforce of builders, craftsmen, and warriors. As cattle herds expanded and local gold deposits were developed, a powerful elite emerged. By the 13th century, this elite began transforming a rocky hilltop valley into a sprawling urban centre that would eventually house over 18,000 people. A population density that surpassed many contemporary European towns. The most defining and breathtaking feature of Great Zimbabwe is its architecture. Spanning over 1,800 acres, the city is divided into three distinct complexes: the Hill Complex, the Valley Ruins, and the famous Great Enclosure. What makes these structures a miracle of ancient engineering is the technique used to build them. Master stonemasons quarried local granite by heating the rock faces with large fires and then rapidly cooling them with water. The sudden temperature shock caused the granite to fracture into smooth, uniform stone bricks. Without using mortar, clay, or cement to bind the stones together, craftsmen stacked millions of granite blocks with meticulous precision, relying entirely on gravity, friction, and interlocking curves to create walls that have stood firm for nearly 800 years. Perched atop a steep granite cliff sits the Hill Complex, the oldest part of the city. Serving as the sacred royal sanctuary and the residence of the king, the Hill Complex features narrow stone passages, hidden alcoves, and natural granite boulders integrated seamlessly into man-made walls. From this elevated fortress, the king ruled not only as a political leader, but as a divine intermediary between his people and Mwari, the supreme creator god, as well as the revered ancestral spirits known as the Vadzimu. It was within the high stone alcoves of the Hill Complex that archaeologists discovered 8 exquisite sculptures carved from soft soapstone, the famous Zimbabwe birds. These eagle-like figures, perched atop decorated stone pillars, featured human-like toes and distinct markings. They were not mere decorations, they were sacred symbols of royal authority and spiritual protection, representing the king's ability to fly into the spirit realm to intercede for his people. Looking down from the Hill Complex into the valley below, one beholds the crowning jewel of the city, the Great Enclosure. The Great Enclosure is the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa built south of the Sahara. Its outer wall, constructed from over 15,000 tons of granite blocks, forms a massive ellipse stretching over 800 feet in circumference and soaring 32 feet high. Inside this outer wall runs a narrow, curving stone corridor that leads to a mysterious, solid stone monument known as the Conical Tower. Rising 30 feet above the ground, the conical tower resembles a giant stone granary. Because it is completely solid with no hollow chambers inside, historians believe it was built as a symbolic monument to royal generosity and agricultural abundance. A permanent stone representation of a grain bin, reassuring the populace that the king possessed the spiritual power to guarantee bountiful harvests and prevent famine. While the royal family dwelt inside the cool, imposing granite walls of the Hill Complex and Great Enclosure, the common population lived in the surrounding valley. Their homes were constructed of deka, a durable mixture of clay, gravel, and thatch, neatly arranged around the central stone complexes. Great Zimbabwe was not an isolated kingdom lost in the African interior. It was a vibrant, global trading hub. Gold, mined from shallow shafts across the plateau, was processed and beaten into delicate foils to cover wooden bowls, royal scepters, and small animal sculptures, most famously the golden rhinoceros of Mapungubwe's cultural lineage. Merchant caravans traveled from Great Zimbabwe down river valleys to Swahili coastal port cities like Sofala and Kilwa along the Indian Ocean. At these coastal ports, Zimbabwean gold, ivory, and copper were traded for luxury goods brought by Taos ships from across the globe. Archaeological excavations at Great Zimbabwe have unearthed breathtaking foreign artifacts buried beneath the soil. Fine blue and white porcelain from Ming Dynasty China, delicate glass beads from Venice and India, glazed pottery from Persia, and coins minted in the distant Islamic sultanates of the Arabian Peninsula. The king of Great Zimbabwe sat at the center of a lucrative trade network that connected the African interior directly to the global economy of the Middle Ages, long before European ships ever rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Yet, despite its monumental walls, immense wealth, and global connections, Great Zimbabwe was a society without a written language. Its history was not recorded in parchment scrolls or leather-bound books, but preserved through rich oral traditions, sacred songs, and the silent testimony of its stone walls. How, then, did this bustling stone metropolis fall into silence? By the late 15th century, around 1450, the golden age of Great Zimbabwe came to an abrupt end. The city was gradually abandoned, its grand stone halls left empty, its fires extinguished, and its trade routes redirected. The downfall of Great Zimbabwe was not caused by a bloody foreign conquest or a single catastrophic battle. Instead, it was the victim of its own massive success and severe ecological strain. Housing nearly 20,000 people alongside massive herds of cattle within a concentrated valley led to severe overgrazing, soil depletion, and deforestation. The surrounding timber was exhausted to supply cooking fuel and furnace fires for smelting metals. As the soil lost its fertility, agricultural yields plummeted, making it impossible to feed the city's vast population. Compounding this environmental crisis was a severe shift in regional climate patterns. Prolonged droughts dried up local streams and reduced pasture land. Simultaneously, the shallow gold deposits around the city were depleted, forcing miners to move further north toward the Zambezi River and further west into the interior. Recognizing that the land could no longer support the empire, the royal court and the population migrated. A prince named Nyatsimba Mutota marched north to found the Mutapa Empire, while another royal faction established the Torwa Kingdom to the west. Great Zimbabwe was left behind, not in chaos, but in an orderly, gradual exodus. Over the centuries that followed, the tropical rains, shifting winds, and thick vegetation of the African bush slowly reclaimed the abandoned stone city. Creepers climbed the granite walls, trees took root between the mortarless stones, and wild animals roamed through the empty royal corridors. When 19th century European colonizers arrived, led by figures like Cecil Rhodes, they systematically sought to deny the African origin of Great Zimbabwe to justify imperial rule. Colonial authorities went so far as to censor archaeologists who declared that the ruins were built by the indigenous Shona people, destroying priceless archaeological layers in a frantic search for non-African origins. It was only in the mid-20th century, through rigorous scientific excavation and radiocarbon dating, that the truth was indisputably restored. Great Zimbabwe was built by African hands, designed by African minds, and ruled by African kings. When the nation gained its independence in 1980, it discarded its colonial name of Rhodesia and proudly chose the name Zimbabwe, derived from the Shona phrase Zimbadzamabwe, meaning houses of stone. The iconic soapstone bird carved by ancient craftsmen centuries ago now graces the national flag, serving as a permanent symbol of heritage, resilience, and pride. Today, visiting the silent ruins of Great Zimbabwe at dawn is a deeply spiritual experience. The morning mist clings to the high granite cliffs of the hill complex, while the golden sunlight illuminates the curving walls of the great enclosure. There are no bustling crowds, only the soft rustle of wind through the acacia trees and the distant calls of birds echoing off ancient stone. Standing in the shadow of the conical tower, looking out over the silent valley, one feels the enduring power of a realm that wrote its name not on paper, but upon the very bedrock of the earth. As night settles over the African plateau and the stars ignite the dark sky above, imagine the faint glow of fires against granite walls, the distant rhythm of traditional drums, and the peaceful rest of an ancient kingdom sleeping in stone. Leaving the dry granite plateaus of southern Africa and travelling north toward the cold, misty waters of the North Sea, our journey through lost worlds brings us to a realm that vanished not beneath shifting desert sands or overgrown jungle vines, but beneath the relentless, rising tides of the ocean itself. Today, the North Sea is a cold, grey expanse of water separating the eastern coast of Great Britain from the shores of Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. Ships navigate its choppy waves, oil rigs dot its horizons, and fishermen haul their nets through its depths. Yet, if we turn back the clock 8,000 years, there was no sea here at all. In its place lay a vast, fertile, undulating landscape of rich valleys, meandering rivers, thick birch forests, and expansive freshwater lakes. Stretching unbroken from the chalk cliffs of England to the coastline of Scandinavia, this was a continent-sized landmass that once formed the true heartland of Europe. This was Doggerland, Europe's lost Atlantis. To understand the forgotten story of Doggerland, we must travel back to the climax of the last ice age, around 20,000 years before the Common Era. At that time, massive ice sheets, thousands of feet thick, covered much of northern North America and northern Europe. Because so much of the Earth's water was locked away in these colossal glaciers, global sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower than they are today. As a result, the coastline of Europe was radically different. The English Channel did not exist. Great Britain was not an island, but a high, mountainous peninsula firmly attached to the European mainland. The land connecting Britain to the continent was Doggerland, named by modern marine archaeologists after the Dogger Bank, an isolated sandbank in the North Sea, frequented by Dutch fishing boats known as doggers. Around 12,000 years ago, as the global climate began to warm and the ice sheets started their slow retreat, Doggerland transformed into a lush, bountiful paradise for human settlement. It was not a frozen, barren wasteland, but a paradise of biodiversity. Warm, meltwater rivers carved gentle paths through rich floodplains, feeding expansive wetlands and calm estuaries. Dense forests of oak, hazel, and pine blanketed the rolling hills, while coastal marshes swarmed with millions of migratory birds, fish, and shellfish. For the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer communities who inhabited Europe, Doggerland was arguably the most desirable and resource-rich territory on the entire continent. Imagine standing on a high ridge in Doggerland 8,000 years before the Common Era. Below you, herds of giant red deer, wild cattle known as aurochs, wild horses, and woolly mammoths grazed across endless green meadows. Saber-toothed cats and cave lions stalked their prey through the brush, while packs of wolves hunted along riverbanks. Human hunter-gatherers lived in harmony with this dynamic landscape. They were nomadic and semi-nomadic bands of skilled survivalists who constructed seasonal camps along river junctions and coastal estuaries. They crafted sophisticated tools from flint, deer antlers, and animal bone, creating barbed harpoons to catch salmon, woven fish traps from willow branches, and lightweight canoes carved from single tree trunks. Life in Doggerland was rich in community and culture. Families gathered around evening campfires, roasting wild boar and waterfowl, tanning animal hides for clothing and tents, and passing down oral traditions through songs and stories. To these ancient people, Doggerland was not a temporary refuge. It was their eternal world, a vast, unchanging homeland bounded by distant mountains and endless horizons. Yet, the very force that created the paradise of Doggerland was destined to destroy it. As the global climate continued to warm, the vast ice sheets covering North America and Scandinavia melted at an accelerating rate. Millions of gallons of fresh water poured into the oceans every second, causing sea levels to rise globally by several feet every century. For the inhabitants of Doggerland, the drowning of their world was a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolded over generations. Year after year, decade after decade, the ocean crept higher. High tides pushed further inland, turning freshwater lakes into salty marshes and drowning ancient coastal forests. Favorite hunting grounds were transformed into shallow mudflats, and winter storms battered low-lying settlements with unprecedented violence. Grandfathers told stories to their grandchildren of ancestral hunting grounds that were now completely underwater, places where wild cattle once grazed that could now only be reached by wooden canoe. As the sea level rose, Doggerland began to fracture. What was once a continuous continental plain was gradually carved into a chaotic network of shrinking peninsulas, low-lying islands, and marshy archipelagos. Human populations were forced to continually pack their settlements and migrate to higher ground, some moving west toward the hills of modern Britain, others moving east toward the rising terrain of Scandinavia and the Netherlands. The final, terrifying death blow to Doggerland came around 6,200 years before the Common Era in a sudden, apocalyptic event known as the Storegga Slide. Off the coast of modern-day Norway, a massive underwater landslide occurred at the edge of the continental shelf. An astounding 800 cubic miles of coastal sediment and rock collapsed into the ocean depths, triggering one of the largest and most destructive tsunamis in human history. A terrifying wall of water, towering up to 30 feet high, swept across the North Sea at speeds exceeding hundreds of miles per hour. For the vulnerable communities living on the low-lying, shrinking islands of Doggerland, there was no warning and no escape. The colossal tsunami wave roared over the coastal marshes, flattening primeval forests, engulfing entire encampments in a matter of minutes, and sweeping thousands of human beings and land animals out into the ocean. When the turbulent waters finally receded, the remaining low-lying lands of Doggerland were completely submerged. What little land remained above water was soon swallowed by the continuing rise of global sea levels. By 6,000 years before the Common Era, Doggerland was completely gone. Great Britain was officially severed from the European mainland, becoming an island isolated by the cold waters of the newly formed English Channel and North Sea. A whole continent-sized homeland, along with the graves, settlements, and memories of thousands of generations, had vanished beneath the waves. For thousands of years, the memory of Doggerland was completely erased from human consciousness. There were no written records, no stone monuments left above water, and no oral legends that survived the abyss of time. To modern historians, Great Britain had always been an island, and the North Sea had always been a sea. It was only in the late 19th and 20th centuries that the underwater ghost of Doggerland began to speak. North Sea fishermen trawling for cod and flatfish began pulling up strange, disturbing objects in their heavy nets from the ocean floor. Alongside the bones of long-extinct mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and lions, fishermen hauled up undeniably human artifacts. Delicately carved harpoons made of deer antler, polished flint axe heads, and fossilized human bones stained dark by thousands of years beneath sea mud. In 1931, a commercial fishing vessel named the Colander was working near the Dogger Bank, 25 miles off the English coast. When the crew hauled up a lump of peat moss from the seabed, they discovered a beautifully crafted, 4,000-year-old Mesolithic antler harpoon embedded within it, perfectly preserved in the oxygen-poor seafloor. This remarkable discovery sparked an archaeological revolution. In recent decades, using advanced seismic survey technology, marine geologists and archaeologists have mapped the drowned landscape of Doggerland in staggering detail. Using sound waves transmitted from survey ships, scientists have pierced the ocean floor, revealing ancient riverbeds, buried hills, prehistoric coastlines, and marshy basins that were last seen by human eyes thousands of years ago. Today, underwater archaeologists are excavating drowned settlements, recovering preserved wooden tools, flint weapons, and human footprints preserved in fossilized mud beneath 80 feet of seawater. Standing on a windy beach along the eastern coast of England or the western shore of the Netherlands, looking out over the grey, restless waves of the North Sea, one experiences a profound shift in perspective. Beneath those rolling waves lies a lost world, a drowned landscape where human children once played, hunters stalked game through ancient forests, and families gathered around glowing fires. Doggerland stands as a silent, poignant warning from the ancient past, reminding us of the fragile nature of human settlements against the unstoppable power of shifting climates and rising seas. As the night deepens and the ocean wind seems to echo through the darkness, imagine the soft rustle of ancient birch leaves, the calm flow of drowned rivers, and the peaceful, silent rest of a continent sleeping beneath the sea. Leaving behind the drowned plains of northern Europe and travelling south toward the sunlit, turquoise waters of the Mediterranean, our journey takes us to an era when wealth was measured not in acres of land or massive standing armies, but in bolts of silk, sacks of spices, barrels of olive oil, and golden ducats. For hundreds of years during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the Mediterranean was not merely a sea, but the economic heartbeat of the known world. At the center of this maritime web sat a unique kind of superpower, an empire without vast continental borders, built entirely upon water, timber, credit, and daring trade. This was the Republic of Venice and the maritime trade empires of the Levant. To understand the miracle of Venice, we must look at its humble, desperate beginnings. In the 5th century of the Common Era, as the Western Roman Empire collapsed under waves of Germanic invasions, refugee populations from the Italian mainland fled into the marshy, mosquito-infested lagoons at the northern tip of the Adriatic Sea. Building temporary shelters on muddy islands, these refugees turned to the only resources available to them, salt and fish. They learned to navigate the treacherous, shallow channels of the lagoon in flat-bottomed boats, building sturdy timber foundations driven deep into the mud to support stone homes. Out of these swampy refuges arose a maritime republic that would dominate European trade for over half a millennium. Unlike the feudal kingdoms of Western Europe, which were ruled by landed nobility and military knights, Venice was governed as a merchant republic. At its head sat the Doge, a ruler elected for life by a council of wealthy merchant families. Venice had no interest in territorial conquests for the sake of royal glory. Every war, treaty, and alliance was calculated with a cold, precise business logic. Would it secure trade routes, protect shipping lanes, and increase profit? By the 12th century, Venice had transformed into the world's premier naval industrial power. At the heart of its military and commercial might was the Arsenal, a colossal, state-owned shipyard that was arguably the world's first mass-production assembly line. Inside the high brick walls of the Arsenal, thousands of skilled workers constructed merchant galleys and warships using standardized, interchangeable parts. So efficient was this system that when a French king visited Venice, the workers assembled, fitted, and launched a fully armed war galley in less than 2 hours. The foundation of Venetian wealth rested on its exclusive access to the trade routes of the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean region encompassing modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. The Levant was the western terminus of the ancient Silk Road and maritime spice routes connecting Europe to India, Southeast Asia, and China. Venetian merchants sailed their heavily guarded convoys across the Mediterranean to coastal Levant cities like Alexandria, Acre, Beirut, and Aleppo. In the bustling bazaars of the East, Venetian traders exchanged Western timber, wool, metals, and silver for exotic, highly valuable luxuries. Fragrant black pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, silk from China, fine porcelain, precious gems, and aromatic resins. Returning home, Venetian galleys unloaded these precious cargoes along the Grand Canal. Venice held a virtual monopoly on the European spice trade. A single cargo of pepper or cloves brought back to Venice could yield a profit of several 100%, making Venetian merchants some of the wealthiest men in human history. With this immense wealth, Venice built an empire of stone, marble, and gold. The city was adorned with magnificent Gothic and Renaissance palaces floating upon the canals, decorated with brilliant frescoes and marble facades. The Piazza San Marco, dominated by the golden mosaics of St. Mark's Basilica and the Doge's Palace, became the grand reception hall of Europe, where ambassadors, kings, and foreign traders marveled at the unbridled luxury of the Maritime Republic. To secure its trade networks, Venice carved out a maritime empire across the Mediterranean known as the Stato de Mar, the State of the Sea. Venice conquered and fortified strategic islands and coastal ports along the Adriatic coast, Greece, Crete, and Cyprus. Every port was a fortified naval base and supply depot, ensuring that Venetian merchant fleets could sail thousands of miles under the protection of the Republic's flag. Venetian diplomacy was as sharp as its swords. The Republic maintained a vast, sophisticated network of professional spies and ambassadors stationed in every major capital, from London to Constantinople and Cairo. Venetian diplomats were famous for their pragmatism. While European popes preached crusades against the Islamic world, Venice signed lucrative trade treaties with Mamluk sultans and Ottoman emperors, famously declaring, "We are Venetian first, then Christian." However, this golden age of maritime commerce contained the seeds of its own eventual decline. The first major blow to Venetian dominance came in 1453, when the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire and gaining firm control over the overland trade routes between Europe and Asia. The Ottomans imposed heavy taxes and restrictions on European merchants, sparking intense competition and naval warfare between Venice and the Ottoman navy. The second, and ultimately fatal, death blow came not from naval battles, but from a dramatic shift in geography. In 1498, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, establishing a direct sea route between Western Europe and India. Suddenly, European nations could bypass the Mediterranean, the Levant, and the Venetian monopoly altogether. Goods brought directly by sea around Africa arrived in Lisbon, Amsterdam, and London far cheaper than those transported through the Levant and Venice. Within a few decades, the Mediterranean ceased to be the absolute center of global trade. The center of economic gravity shifted westward toward the Atlantic Ocean. The great merchant families of Venice, recognizing that the era of maritime trade dominance was ending, slowly pulled their capital out of shipping, investing instead in grand agricultural estates on the Italian mainland. Though Venice remained a wealthy, elegant city celebrated for its art, opera, and carnival culture, its political and economic empire quietly eroded over the centuries. The final chapter of the Thousand-Year Republic came in 1797, when Napoleon Bonaparte marched his revolutionary armies into northern Italy. The last Doge abdicated without a fight. The ancient Venetian flag was lowered, and the Republic of Venice was dissolved, its territories partitioned between France and Austria. Today, walking across the cobblestone bridges of Venice, past grand palaces whose marble steps are slowly kissed by the salt water of the lagoon, one feels the silent majesty of an empire built on water and ambition. The busy bazaars of the Levant and the grand floating palaces of the lagoon stand as silent monuments to an era when brave sailors, shrewd merchants, and visionary builders forged a global trade network that connected continents, changed human culture, and shaped the modern global economy. As the night deepens over the quiet canals and the soft lapping of water against stone echoes through the darkness, imagine the distant singing of gondoliers, the rustle of costly silk, and the peaceful rest of a maritime empire sleeping upon the sea. Leaving behind the blue waves of the Mediterranean and traveling east toward the sun-baked plains and mountainous plateaus of the Near East, our search for lost empires reaches one of the most ancient, powerful, yet overlooked civilizations of human antiquity. Long before the Persian Empire spanned continents, and long before Alexander the Great marched his phalanxes into Asia, a magnificent, deeply sophisticated kingdom stood as a peer and fierce rival to the mighty states of Mesopotamia: Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, and Assyria. Situated in what is today southwestern Iran, nestled between the Zagros Mountains and the fertile plains of Khuzestan, this realm defined the politics, trade, and spirituality of the Bronze and Iron Ages for over 2 millennia. This was the kingdom of Elam. To understand the story of Elam, we must travel back to the 4th millennium before the Common Era. As the world's earliest urban societies emerged along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Elam arose simultaneously along the banks of the Karun and Kaka rivers. Its ancient capital, Susa, was founded around 4200 before the Common Era, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited urban settlements in human history. Elam was a realm of striking geography and cultural contrast. It combined two distinct worlds: the lowland, agricultural plains around Susa, which resembled the rich soils of southern Mesopotamia, and the high, rugged highlands of Anshan in the Zagros Mountains. This unique dual identity gave Elam strategic advantages that its lowland neighbors lacked. When Mesopotamian armies invaded the plains, the Elamite royal court could retreat into the impenetrable mountain fortresses, regroup, and launch devastating counterattacks. The Elamites were a distinct people with a unique language, a language isolate completely unrelated to the Semitic tongues of Akkadian and Assyrian, or the Indo-European languages that later dominated the region. They developed their own written script, early linear Elamite, before eventually adopting and adapting cuneiform to record their administrative documents, royal inscriptions, and religious hymns. Religion in Elam was deeply mystical and centered on a rich pantheon of deities who inhabited sacred groves, high mountain peaks, and subterranean temples. Primary among them was Inshushinak, the protector god of Susa and lord of the underworld, alongside Kiririsha, the great mother goddess, and Humban, the supreme celestial deity. The most breathtaking surviving monument to Elamite spiritual devotion is the ziggurat of Chokha-Zanbil, built around 1250 before the Common Era by King Untashnapirisha. Located near Susa, Chokha-Zanbil is one of the best preserved ancient ziggurats in the world. Soaring 5 levels high, constructed from millions of fired mud bricks, many inscribed with royal Elamite cuneiform. This massive stepped pyramid was dedicated to Inshushinak. Its towering walls and concentric courtyards were designed as an earthly sanctuary where gods and mortals could meet under the open desert sky. For centuries, Elam was an economic powerhouse. Rich in timber, precious stones, tin, and copper mined from the mountains, Elam controlled crucial trade routes linking Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley and Central Asia. The kings of Elam were master strategists and formidable military leaders who engaged in a continuous, complex dance of alliance and war with the great powers of Mesopotamia. Elamite armies were feared across the ancient world. Famous for their elite archers, war chariots, and mountain infantry, the Elamites repeatedly altered the course of human history. In 1900, before the Common Era, An Elamite invasion swept down from the mountains and sacked the famous Sumerian city of Ur, bringing an end to the historic Third Dynasty of Ur, an event commemorated in ancient lamentation tablets for centuries. Later, under the Middle Elamite Empire, rulers like Shutruk-Nakhunte launched aggressive campaigns into Babylonia. Returning victorious to Susa, Elamite armies carried away priceless trophies of war, including the famous Code of Hammurabi stele and the Victory stele of Naram-Sin, placing them in the royal acropolis at Susa as symbols of ultimate supremacy. Yet, living next to the aggressive, expanding military war machine of the Neo-Assyrian Empire ultimately brought tragic ruin to Elam. In the 7th century before the Common Era, tensions between Assyria and Elam reached a bloody, apocalyptic climax. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal launched a relentless, scorched earth invasion of the Elamite heartland. In 647 before the Common Era, Assyrian legions captured, looted, and utterly destroyed the royal city of Susa. Ashurbanipal boasted of his destruction in royal inscriptions. He leveled the temples of Susa, despoiled the sacred groves, carried away the statues of Elamite gods, and sowed salt into the soil so that nothing might grow again. The ancient kingdom of Elam was broken, its cities burned to ash, and its royal lineage ended. However, the spirit and culture of Elam did not vanish completely. The Elamite people, their administrative expertise, and their artistic traditions were absorbed into the rising empire of the Persians. When Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid Persian Empire a century later, he adopted Susa as one of his principal imperial capitals, utilizing Elamite scribes, building techniques, and administrative systems to govern his vast domain. Elamite became one of the 3 official languages of the Persian Empire, carved side by side with Old Persian and Babylonian on the famous Behistun inscription. Across our long journey through time and space, we have walked through the forgotten corridors of human memory. We explored the shadowy peaks of Carpathia and the lost Middle Kingdom of Burgundy, whose courtly brilliance once illuminated Western Europe. We ventured deep along the Nile to behold the Black Pharaohs, steep sandstone pyramids, and iron furnaces of the Kingdom of Kush. We journeyed into the endless Baltic forests of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the last pagan empire that grew to dominate a continent. We uncovered the giant earthen pyramids and astronomical alignments of Cahokia along the Mississippi River, and stood before the dry stone walls and golden treasures of Great Zimbabwe in the heart of southern Africa. We dived beneath the cold, rolling waves of the North Sea to rediscover the drowned Mesolithic paradise of Doggerland, and sailed with the merchant princes of Venice through the lucrative maritime networks of the Levant. Finally, we uncovered the sacred ziggurats and ancient arches of Elam, whose legacy helped birth the Persian world. These lost realms teach us a timeless, humbling lesson. No empire, no matter how vast its borders, how grand its stone monuments, or how invincible its armies, is permanent. Maps are fluid, written upon shifting sands, rising tides, and changing climates. Rulers and nations rise, shine with brilliant radiance, and eventually yield to the quiet march of time. Yet, though these empires fell into darkness, their stories are not truly lost. They live on in the silent stones they carved, the artifacts buried beneath the soil, and the enduring memory of human curiosity. As long as we remember their names, listen to their stories, and honor their achievements, their legacy remains alive, illuminating our past and guiding our future. As the final light of this journey fades and complete silence settles around you, let your mind rest. Let the ancient dust settle. Let the distant echoes of forgotten horns die away, and drift into a peaceful, unbroken sleep beneath the quiet stars.